Well, today is somebody's birthday. It's the 75th anniversary of Superman. I couldn't sleep. Started digging through stuff and figured, I'll show off some Superman stuff. Pulled out so many things. I found out that I have literally thousands and thousands of comics about Superman or of Superman, cartoons, movies. It's a lot of stuff. So I whittled it down to, we'll just do a top 10 video. Alright? This is a bit of stuff. Which Alright. Yeah, I look like a fanboy. So, anyway, I didn't buy my cake, so I figured I'd dress up. Move the boys over. And get on with the top 10 comics. I'll try to make it a quick video. Alright. So, this is my top 10 list. I'm not saying this is the ultimate top 10 list. But, we'll keep it about the comics stuff. And, you agree, you disagree, it's okay. Because tomorrow this could change when I start digging through more books. Alright. Number 10. There's a story in here. This is Superman Annual number 9. And I think it came out around 1983. Yep, it says it right there on top of that little bullet, 1983. And there's two stories in this. And let's see how many times I can say and. Like I said, I can't sleep. But anyway, two stories in this. And there's a real personal story on this. There was a man named Curt Swan, who hopefully everybody knows if you know anything about Superman. And he did Superman for a very long time. He was the Superman artist. Well, what makes this story that I want to show you different is that Curt Swan actually came up with it. It was he did the story. And it's called I Flew with Superman. Artist, storyteller Curt Swan, as told to Cary Bates, plot, Elliot S. Megan, copy, and Julius Schwartz did the editing. Okay, and what we did is Curt Swan is the man when it came to drawing Superman, and he drew himself in there. Basically, he falls asleep working at the desk, and he wakes up on a park bench and thinks he just, was sleepwalking when the cop wakes him up and moves him on. He starts walking around, and more or less he figures out that things are kind of odd, and he sees a lot of people looking around and looking up, and actually he comes across Galaxy Communications building where Clark Kent worked as a broadcaster, and he looked around and saw a newsstand and figured out he was at the Daily Planet. And after his little adventure there, he sees Superman on the front page. Now, after drawing Superman all those years, he knows pretty much everything about Superman, so he knew the address to go find Clark, and he told him who he was. And they come up, he's easily able to convince Superman that he's not from that planet. And basically, Superman ends up getting, I don't know, a bunch of thugs show up, and they shoot at Superman, and the bullets bounce off of him, and he catches them. Long story short, Curt Swan wakes up, thinks it was all a dream, and the story that he was drawing was complete. He was behind on a deadline. And he's just kind of like, how did that happen and stuff? And then he reaches down in his pocket, opens his hand, and there's a bunch of bullets that have hit something. So was it a dream, or did he really go, fly with Superman? Number 9, one of my personal favorites. And this actually was part of the 50th anniversary of Superman 25 years ago. It came out in 1988. It's by John Byrne, who wrote it, Mike Mignola, who drew it before he was a superstar, Mr. Hellboy himself, and Carl Kessel. And it's called Return to Krypton. And it's the Superman number 18. And basically what happens is that when Krypton exploded, and a lot of the mass that was Krypton converted to kryptonite, which can kill Superman, it sent out a wave of radiation, and it took 50 years for this wave of radiation to reach Earth, and Superman had to go down into a cave. And I think this is like continued from another book, and Man-Bat more or less found him in the cave, flew off, and then Hawkman came, Hawkman decided to get him out of the cave, away from the radiation. They flew off into space and they tried to track the source of this kryptonite wave. And they actually end up where Krypton was. And John Byrne used real life science, because when a planet explodes and never really goes away, there's still a gravity field there. So there's all this mass of kryptonite, and he jumps out there. He's returning home more or less, and he has a fever dream about what would happen if all the Kryptonians had come to Earth. And when they did, they were landing in their big shuttles and everything, and they landed all over the world, and they more or less took over. And there's big revolutions and revolts by humans, and Superman, who is a Kryptonian born on Earth and was raised Kryptonian, and more or less, was told he was royalty because he's better than these humans, ends up ripping off the suits that the Kryptonians wore. They never took them off. These things sustained them and everything like that. And the big S started getting spread around, and he more or less led the revolution against his own people because it was wrong. Loved that story. Loved that story when it came out. Still do. 10, 9. This is number 8. And this is Superman number 775. Okay. This is written by, I think his name was Joe Kelly. Doug Mank did the art. A couple other people in here. And this is from 2001. And around this time, The Authority was hitting big. Okay. It was a Wildstorm book, and this is where you had superheroes who became proactive, and they decided they wanted to, start, instead of reacting to when, crimes happened, they would stop them before they started. But this meant taking down governments and really setting themselves up. And people were jumping on board, and I think it was more of a fad than anything. So this was a book where Superman, who was the traditional superhero, took on a version of the Elite. They were called the Elite. And I think they actually made a cartoon of this not too long ago, and Joe Kelly actually wrote the script to it. Came straight on the DVD. But what's so funny about Truth, Justice, and the American Way? And it just kind of shows that Superman could take them down if he wanted to play by their rules, but he took them down playing by his rules, and he really fooled them and did it easily. Anyway, it just kind of showed what Superman was about Superman. And the way I interpret the story is what Superman always kind of taught me, without sounding all fanboyish here, is that, these heroes are bullies, more or less. And Superman taught you to stand up to bullies, not be a bully. Okay? Number 7. Number 7 is, I consider it a Superman story, but it's Superman and Batman and how they intertwine. And I honestly think this was one of John Byrne's last great works. Say what you will about John Byrne, he did a lot of great books. He X-Men, Fantastic Four, rejuvenated, did the reboot of Superman for his 50th anniversary leading up to it. But what he did in the 90s here is he did an Elseworlds tale, and it's an imaginary tale called Generations. And it's what if Superman and Batman and their supporting cast and everybody aged in real time. And it's told in 2 parts in each book. It was, each part took place 10 years apart. So the first book is 1939 to 1949, and then it's 1959 to 1969. 1979 to 1989, and then it went to 1999, and then it looped back to 1929. And basically, it's just a great story with, each story is written in the style that comics were done at that time. Okay, so here you have them in 1939, you back to 1949. Okay, and then when we get to 1959, this is what I was talking about. They started fighting. They had the books kind of got kind of silly because of the comic code. They had Batmite and Mr. Mxyzptlk pop up, and they ended up fighting giant monsters and stuff. That was kind of the sci-fi thing, thanks to Godzilla, and that was reflected in the monster books of the 50s, because heroes had sort of started disappearing, in real life comics and stuff. They have, they sort of have kids and families and tricks to immortality. In 1979 to 1989, it gets all grim and gritty in the 80s. In the 70s was the Bronze Age, and that's where tragedy started striking. And here they are as they're aging. And there's actually 2 more parts of this. He came out Generations, a second part, another 4-issue Prestige series. And then he came out with a 12-part maxi series. And, they were both really good, the first 2. They were excellent, they kind of got diluted. By the time we got to that 12-part series of Generations, oh wow, time travel can be a headache. That's all I'm going to say. Okay. Let me keep these straight here. Moving right along. Number 6. Now, I enjoyed this together. This is actually 2 miniseries, but they were on the sequel, right? It's called The Nail. And I hate to date this video, but when this is being made on April 18th, 2013, there's a story going on called Age of Ultron, and they just let out that Wolverine is going to go back in time and take out Hank Pym, and then we're going to see the an arc of the Age of Ultron story where we see what happens with the Marvel Universe if Hank Pym wasn't there to affect everything. Well, I kind of rolled my eyes because I've heard this story before, and it was here, and I'm sure this story's been told other times before. Just like it's just it's a Wonderful Life with George, not having that Christmas that he was just ready to kill himself, and you got to see what would happen if he wasn't around. But anyway, this is called Justice League: The Nail. And it's a Superman story because Alan Davis came up with the idea that because of a nail, he tells a poem, because of a nail, Martha Kent and Jonathan Kent are getting in their car, but they don't drive off because there's a nail stuck in their tire. And because of this nail being stuck in their tire, Jonathan has to fix the tire, and Superman, as a baby, lands from Krypton. And they're not there to see the rocket, and they're not there to get Superman. So this is a DC universe of what if Superman was never there. Okay, and we see, it's quite a universe. Alan Davis really outdid himself. He worked for years with Alan Moore before he came and did American comics, so maybe that's where he picked up a few ideas to become the great writer that really amazes me. All right, and then he does pop up. They came up with part 2 of The Nail. Second one, another nail, and I'm not going to ruin it for you and let you know what's going on, but it's all about what if DC Universe formed without Superman. It shows how important he is. Okay. Number 5. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Red Sun. This was a 3-issue miniseries. I've got the trade paperback. This came out in the early 2000s, and this is by Mark Miller and Dave Johnson. And basically, it's what I can gather is, what if Krypton had exploded a little bit sooner or a little bit later, and Superman's rocket took off just a little bit off of kilter, time-wise, because the way the Earth rotates, he landed in Kansas just by pure luck. Well, what if something had happened where he, left a little bit sooner or later, and he ended up on the other side of the world in the Soviet Union and grew up with morals of being a communist, a socialist. He's such a big patriot for America. What if he was a big patriot for the Soviet Union growing up? And this is just an excellent, excellent story. Excellent story. This is one of the ones maybe I do need to review one day. Okay. Number 4. I think we're at 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen this because they actually made a cartoon of it with Justice League Unlimited a couple years ago. It's been talked about. It's Superman Annual Number 11 from 1985 with the team of who did The Watchmen, Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. And this is for the man who has everything. It's Superman's birthday, much like it is today. And Superman, Wonder Woman, and Robin are showing up at the Fortress of Solitude to give him presents, yet they find him standing there with a Black Mercy plan. And then we see in his head what would happen if Clark Kent had grown up on Krypton, had a family. And meanwhile, Mongol is just wearing out Wonder Woman and trying to figure out how to get Superman, get this plane off of Superman and get him out of his trance. And meanwhile, in his head, you kind of see the Silver Age of Krypton as it had progressed. Alan Moore actually knew his Superman trivia there from the Silver Age and wrote a fabulous story, and Superman has to figure out that everything he's living his entire life that is in his head, that where he grew up, is not real, and has to say goodbye to his son. And when he comes out of the trance and he gets a hold of Mongol, he just looks at him, and it has a classic line where his eyes go red, and then he looks at Mongol and he says, "Burn," and shoots him. Really good. Okay, number 3. I need to do a review of this. I've talked about it for years, okay? This is by Kurt Busiek and Stuart Immonen. I gotta stop doing these videos so late at night. Anyway, this is more or less inspired by DC Comics Presents 85 or 86, where they introduced, Superboy Prime. Back when there was a multiverse, when they had Infinite Earths and stuff, there was one called, Earth Prime. That was supposed to be an Us, and all these heroes take place in comic books. We read them in comic books, and this is what if it kind of happened in the real world. There are Superman comic books, and this guy's name actually is Clark Kent. He even ends up having a girlfriend named Lois, and they joke about them being Clark Kent and Lois with the Superman comic books. And he kind of has learned to take the jokes that come along with being with a name like Clark Kent. And for his birthdays, everybody gets him all these Superman presents, like he's a big Superman fan. And then he goes camping one night, and he wakes up, and he's floating up in the air in his sleeping bag. And at first he's just kind of shocked, and then he just kind of grins. And the thing about it is that, it kind of turns out this might be evolution. They never really say how. It might be genetics, evolution, maybe there's something special about him. But we travel through his life, and this is like it's written in the real world. To me, this is Kurt Busiek's greatest story. Superman has a family. The government wants to get a hold of him, and he knows it. That's kind of why he tries to have a secret identity. He tries to help out. And, Superman ends up getting, this Clark Kent ends up getting a very happy ending. That's what's kind of cool about it. It's very upbeat. He ends up becoming a writer for real. And it's kind of like, if this was, Kurt Busiek never says it, but in the last issue, you kind of get the idea that this may just be evolution of us. And I kind of got the idea that because of the Superman comic books, he still influenced heroes, because who's to say that when he interpreted what was happening to him as superpowers, like Superman, because he'd read those comics. Maybe they weren't that at all. That's just what happened. I feel like he sort of subconsciously guided the evolution in them for these powers to where they reflected a comic book. I mean, who knows? Who knows? All right, number 2. This was a great 4-issue miniseries. It's another Elseworlds tale. And when you read it, it was the future of the DC universe. And it was mixed with the Bible. And I'm already showing it. But it was Kingdom Come. Okay? There was 4 issues of this. Alex Ross, Mark Waid. Just a masterpiece. And they mixed it with the Book of Revelations. Not Ragnarok. The Book of Revelations. It was, these comics mixed with the Book of Revelations from the Bible. And basically what it is that, Superman's always been interpreted as many things. He's a Christ figure. He's been interpreted as the story of immigrants coming to America, be them Jewish or whatever. And the coming of Superman is usually hope. To me, when I think, if I could describe Superman in one word, it's hope. But in this, Superman reappearing in the world is actually the beginning of Revelations, according to the Bible. And it's a future where it was kind of like a statement on comics where they had gone at the time. You couldn't tell the heroes from the villains, and they were sloppy and they were violent, and they didn't care that when they fought these villains, if they were villains or if it was heroes versus heroes, they didn't worry about the innocence and stuff. They kind of got an elitist that was cool and stuff. And Superman came back yet again. To me, Kingdom Come is a Superman story. And the number 1 Superman story, in my collection at least, in my opinion, is a 2-parter. And it happened right before its 50th anniversary. They talked about the Golden Age Superman. They talked about the Superman of Earth 2. But there was also a Silver Age Superman, in my opinion, who was a separate character from the one from Earth 2. And he had his time in the Silver Age, he had his time in the Bronze Age, and at the end of the Bronze Age, he was gone, you know. So Alan Moore actually threatened the editor over dinner, telling him he had to write whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And it's a story set in the future, and it's a swan song, two-part swan song of the Silver Age Superman. And Alan Moore wrote a masterpiece. It has his friends, it has the Legion, it has the final showdown, it has the death of Crypto, which, you know, maybe that's the one that made me almost cry when that happened. You know, they poured an old Yeller in there, and you have to kind of put it together, just little Easter eggs in there about what happened to Superman. So that's it. That's my top 10. Happy birthday to Superman.